Roughly 1 year ago, The Last Jedi of video games, as it's come to be called, came out. Now what do The Last of Us Part 2 and The Last Jedi have in common? Well, they both have the last in the title. Okay. Well, before we go into the game, perhaps a little bit of history was needed. The Last of Us was a huge hit, as we already covered. They even did a live show which added a bit of an epilogue, which was Joel teaching Ellie how to play the guitar. It was intended as a sort of goodbye to Joel and Ellie. But the fact of the matter is, The Last of Us had such a conclusive ending that many were of the opinion that Joel and Ellie's story never needed to be followed up on. Just leave it be, and let us imagine what happened to them afterwards. But, well, that's not how the entertainment industry works these days, for better or for worse. At the PlayStation Show 2016, at the very end of the year, the teaser for the game was shown. We saw an older Ellie playing a guitar, and Joel walks in and asks Ellie if she's ready to do this, and Ellie critically responds she's going to kill all of them, which hints that something very dark and tragic has happened. Speculation ran rampant. Was Joel really there in the flesh, or was Ellie just hallucinating him? I remember my reaction was, wait and see. Maybe it'll be good, maybe it won't be. Only time will tell. You see, what happened after The Last of Us 1 came out? Fan fictions, headcanons, and all that sets in. It's an age-old question that is asked most fervently with Star Wars. When does something no longer belong to the creator? When does it belong to the fans? Well, that's a tricky question, and not one that I can truly answer. Would you like to imagine more Joel and Ellie adventures after this game? But as I said a long time ago in my Street Fighter 4 review, there's a time to take risks and a time to play it safe. They chose to take a risk for this game, and the risk is tricky to pay off. Neil Druckmann and Haley Gross co-wrote the game. Gone was Bruce Straley, who had decided to leave Naughty Dog due to creative burnout. The development of the game was very rocky. Basically, to put it short, inexperienced developers were brought on since 70% of Naughty Dog had left after Uncharted 4. The crunch conditions were too much to bear, to the point where Naughty Dog can't even hire artists, having to go to the film industry reportedly. But despite all this, Druckmann believed that they were creating his magnum opus. The release date for the game was set for February 21st, 2020, but then it was pushed back to May 29, 2020. But around that time, in March of 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic began to rock the world. The effects of this virus are still ongoing, and at least here in America, we're finally beginning to emerge from it. Not to mention the massive protests that were happening around the country. It was a very dark time. For that reason, I imagine the game was indefinitely delayed, as it wasn't the type of game the world needed at the time. However, in April 2020, most of the game would leak, the circumstances of which I don't really care for. It doesn't really matter. After this leak, that's when all hell broke loose. Everything but the final hours leaked. The second biggest thing was that for half the game you would play as a new character named Abby. And here's what set the internet into chaos. In the opening hours of the game, Abby brutally murders Joel with a golf club. This set off something ugly within the community. Sexist, misogynistic, transphobic contents were aplenty. People had already made up their mind about the game, whether it was good or bad, before they even played it. The creators were getting hateful, anti-Semitic messages, and all in all, it was just a huge mess. So I imagine with the leak pretty much out there, the game had to be released as soon as possible. So on June 19, 2020, the game would be released. A dark game for a very dark time, which to be fair, is not the game's fault. Who knows how people would have actually reacted to the game had the leaks not come out. Now, I would like to point out that leaks are sadly nothing new in this industry, or the entertainment industry at all. It's just the way of things. One thing I saw that was very disgusting was that Laura Bailey, the actress for Abby, received death threats for her character killing Joel, which is just deplorable. Actors are not their characters, people. Sadly, it's nothing new. I don't know why people can't tell the difference between fiction and reality. That goes both ways, I suppose. I should mention, the game pretty much swept the Game Awards, which I don't personally care. I only watched Game Awards for the reveals, and even those are hit and miss. I think after Sephiroth was revealed for Smash, I checked out. So, without wasting any time, let's go into the plot of this game. We start immediately after The Last of Us 1. It does give us the opportunity to play as Joel one last time. We then cut to 5 years later and we get Ellie all grown up, and we meet some new characters, Jesse and Dana, who are honestly pretty generic, all things considered. Also, we meet this girl named Abby who wants to get to Jackson, and it's because she wants to kill Joel. As luck would have it, Abby encounters Joel, who saves her from the infected, meaning Abby ran into Joel through sheer luck. I must admit, I find the circumstances leading up to it to be pretty contrived. Now, a lot of people point out that Joel's written out of character for this to happen, like he forgets his survivor's instinct. They did explain this, but yeah, the fact that it was off screen doesn't help. I'd like to point out that Tommy already said their names, which is another problem because I think it's a little messy as to how they did that. I would say based on Joel's body language that, yeah, he wants to get out of there as soon as possible. And I do like how Joel doesn't even remember what he did to Abby.
Why don't you say whatever speech you got rehearsed and get this over with?
But for me, it was Tuesday. Of course, Ellie managing to find the house where Joel is being tortured is convenient. Unfortunately, Ellie's pleas for Joel's life are ignored.
Joel, get up. Joel, fucking get up. Please stop. Please don't shoot. Joel, please get up. No!
Yeah, let's just say after that, it's really hard to like Abby. Now, I imagine that's the intention, but we'll get into that later. I do like the part where Ellie visits Joel's house and they look around. It gives both Ellie and the players a chance to mourn Joel. Now, I'll get into what I think about Joel's death and how I feel about it. My feelings about it are pretty mixed, I'd say. This is easily the most contentious part of the whole story, but here's something I wonder. For both sides of the camp, those who liked it and those who hated it, how would you have felt if the roles were reversed? What if it was Ellie who got her brains bashed in as Joel watched? How would you feel then? Something to think about. So basically what happens, Ellie travels to Seattle to get revenge on Abby's group, and it's pretty obvious that Ellie is not doing so well. As flashbacks reveal, she and Joel had a falling out over his lie at the end of the first game. Gradually, Ellie uncovered it and vowed to never speak to him again.
I'll go back. But we're done.
Yeah, it hits a little too close to home for me. The intention of Ellie's sections are that she's going too far. Her first kill is justified as what's-his-name is about to kill Dina. Then comes the Vita girl. I'm amazed that Vita is still working in this post-apocalypse world. This is supposed to be the part where Ellie starts jumping up the deep end, but clearly Vita girl stabs at Ellie first, then Ellie responds with a knife to the throat, so it came off as self-defense. Her darkest moment is probably when she beats Nara to death with a bat, but one thing I'm going to point out here, just before Ellie chases Nara, she calls Joel a bitch who got what he deserved. So let's just say any player's sympathy was probably lost after she said that. That being said, Ellie is clearly shaken after she did this, not behavior I'd consider from a so-called psychopath. Not saying she's justified to do this, but she clearly shows regret at what she's doing. The part where she's clearly meant to be going too far is right after she kills Abby's pet dog. Even though I must point out again that if you don't press the button, the dog will rip Ellie's throat out, so yeah. Not to mention at this point the game has already forced you to kill several dogs. Yeah, that's another thing that bugs me. You could try to find a way around without killing the dogs, but it's just easier to take them out. Then comes the part where Ellie kills Owen and Mel. Yeah, people don't explain things to her. I'd say the fault is more Owen's because he escalates the situation by trying to take the gun out of Ellie's hands, leaving her forced to defend herself. Also, the fact that Mel is pregnant is a huge shock to Ellie, but again, it's a bit contrived as Mel was wearing a long coat that conveniently covered up that she was pregnant, meaning Ellie had no way of knowing that. The game is making a point that she's going too far, and I get that, but Ellie has clear regrets over what she's doing, not all the signs of a psychopath. On the other hand, cries about how they've ruined Ellie have rung out. Not my Ellie! I guess that's just how it goes now. What do I know? I'd be a huge hypocrite if I called them out. Now, let's talk about Joel. Yeah, I know, there was plenty of they did Joel dirty videos. How do I feel? It's complicated. Let's cover why Neil Druckmann killed Joel real quick. He basically said that he considered his story finished. So you killed him? Now, this is because he felt that he could still tell stories about Ellie. But, well, that's tricky. There are good and bad sides to Joel's death. Let's start with the bad. I think when you basically rob people of more Joel and Ellie interactions when that was the very soul as to why the first game was so beloved is just wow. Now maybe that's the point. Joel's arc is basically about him earning Ellie's forgiveness after his lie to her was exposed in between these two games, and honestly, I think you could have told that story with him alive. It arguably would have been more meaningful if he had been alive. He only appears in flashbacks from this moment on, so every time he does, you gotta pretend he's alive. I mean, I do consider deaths like Dinobot and Beast Wars to be the prime example of how to kill a character. I know some people say it's not needed in a world like The Last of Us, but I think you could have made it work. Tie it into his redemption arc. That being said, despite his death, Joel is the third most important character in the game. and they definitely pay their respects to him. Even when he's not on screen, Joel is influencing every character's action, whether they know it or not. Ellie is trying to avenge him. Abby is becoming more like him than she knows. I love the scene where Ellie and Joel go to the museum. It's probably the part in the game that feels the most like the first game.
I do okay.
Are you fucking kidding me?
You're welcome, kiddo. What do you say we keep looking around, huh?
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, that feels good. Real father-daughter bonding moment. That being said, I think the game wasted the chance to develop Ellie and Tommy's relationship. They could have bonded over their grief over Joel's death. Not to mention, it's not that surprising that something like this would happen. Quote Joe himself.
It's called luck. And it is gonna run out.
Though I do understand why people would be upset. Ellie watching Joel die, that would be like if Marty had to watch Doc die. Touché. Okay, what if in Yakuza 2, Haruka watched Kiryu get his brain smashed in? How would you feel then? Now, as for the backlash to Joel's death, it's nothing new, honestly. In fact, I would point out that this goes all the way back to when Sir Arthur Conan tried to kill off Sherlock Holmes in The Final Problem. But the reaction was not what he expected, as Jennifer Armstrong said. Readers typically accepted what went on in their favorite books, then moved on. Now they were beginning to take their popular culture personally, and to expect their favorite works to conform to certain expectations. Or an example I'm more familiar with, Optimus Prime in the 1986 Transformers the movie. That came down to commercialism. Optimus and most of the 84 toy line had been discontinued, so Hasbro didn't want them to get screen time anymore. But the reaction from kids was outright devastation. So strong was the reaction that they very quickly brought Optimus Prime back. Beloved characters dying is serious business. I mean, there's nothing right or wrong about it, it's just how it is. Now we get to Abby. Well, yeah, I won't join in on hating her because I've defended other characters like Sakura, so I'd be a hypocrite. Then again, Sakura didn't brutally murder a previously beloved character. Here's the thing about Abby. When her introduction is basically murdering Joel, first impressions are key in how a fandom perceives a character. I mean, that's just how it is, unfortunately. The idea behind Abby's sections are that you, the player, are supposed to forgive her for killing Joel by showing that she has good sides. I appreciate the intention, even if some of it is a little ham-fisted like the zebra scene. We do find out the reason why she wants to kill Joel, which is because the doctor who Joel killed to save Ellie was actually her father. And I want to point something out, in The Last of Us 1, the game forces you to kill him, no matter what. So, yeah. Of course, some would argue you find that out too little too late. Basically, the whole point is Abby is trying to redeem herself for what she did. This is most seen with her relationship with Lev, a boy she looks after, and I'm trying to figure out why Abby is doing this exactly. Obviously, this gives her a parallel to Joel, like how Joel was looking after Ellie in the first game. Except in that case, Joel had a goal of getting Ellie to the Fireflies, and she ended up feeling the hole in his heart after Sarah's death. With Abby, it was her father who was murdered, and this kind of dynamic doesn't really work here. They do have endearing interactions, though. I like when Abby is barely holding herself together because of her fear of heights, and Lev is trying to push her along. Abby's supporting cast are, to put it bluntly, either unlikable or just plain uninteresting. Not to mention, at this point, you've already seen Ellie kill most of them, so it's kind of hard to get attached to them when you know they're already dead. I did notice some moments where the characters berate Abby for torturing Joel, but then they just start having sex and forget all about it. A very weird scene. And one that got him because I suspect Neil Druckmann just wanted to throw in a sex scene. I commend the game for being very challenging. You're meant to be resistant to liking Abby, and you're seeing things from different perspectives. To Ellie, Abby and her group are just the animals who killed Joel, whereas to Abby, Ellie's group are monsters for killing her friends. The big theme of the story is hate and revenge. Now, revenge not being worth it is not that original. In fact, every story that has revenge uses that. Even Mortal Kombat Knight had Scorpion hold his head in shame after killing Sub-Zero. Obviously, Abby realizes that killing Joel wasn't really worth it. When it comes to switching to Abby, Druckmann mentioned Metal Gear Solid 2 as an inspiration, which was also controversial back in the day, but there's a key difference. Raiden didn't brutally murder Snake. Man, can you imagine? I don't think anyone would have liked him if he did that. But one thing that really brings the narrative down for me, and the gameplay, and this is the biggest problem I have with this game, pacing. In the first Last of Us, Sarah dies within the game's first hour, and then after Joel meets Ellie, the pacing is pretty consistent. But here, it takes about 2 hours to get to Joel's death, then you play 3 days in Seattle as Ellie, which took about 10 hours for me, and also they had flashbacks spread throughout the game. Then at the part where the first game ended, the feeder climax between Ellie and Abby hits, but then you go back to Abby and you play those 3 days from her perspective, and this just kills the pacing. I'll come back to this confrontation. I suppose the controversy set in because after Last of Us' ambiguous ending, like I said, many were fine with Joel and Ellie's story ending right there. But fanfictions, fan artists would continue Joel and Ellie's story, and if there was a sequel, it should follow new characters, but Neil Druckmann didn't agree. He felt that would be taking the coward's way out. Not sure I understand that, but whatever. When I still think of Joel and Ellie, I still think of them from the first game. Yes, Ellie's still that 14-year-old girl in my mind. The graphics are stunning, and the detail of the violence is... Jeez, I don't dare show much of it because I don't want to get demonetized. Hence why I didn't show the sex scene. Now, don't get me wrong, I grew up playing Mortal Kombat. I'm desensitized to this kind of stuff. So much detail went into this game, such as the scene where Ellie removes her shirt. You can just feel the animators crying. Crunch is a practice that really needs to stop. Just do normal 9 to 5 hours. Let people go home to their families. Somebody else pointed out to me that Ellie's sections are dark and gray, while Abby's sections have more color, and I think that's a deliberate choice. The gameplay is a really good refinement of the original game. I like the imagery when Joel rides to Jackson. It creates a breathtaking view. I love when Ellie and Dana are on horseback exploring. It's the only time in the game where everything feels open for you to explore because after this it becomes much more linear. You can now go prone and hide in the grass. I'm not sure if this is set up this way, but enemies don't notice you until you are right on top of them. Ellie takes people out with her knife while Abby chokes them to death. Ellie and Abby do have enough differences, but are similar enough to stand out. Everything about the game feels like misery porn. Watch Ellie use the Molotov on these people, and they scream as they slowly burn to death. Every mook has a name, and it's not uncommon to hear them scream that you've killed their husband, or their wife, or their dog. Even though all the mooks basically look the same when you get down to it. Yeah, one thing I noticed, Ellie is forced to kill dogs that track her scent, while Abby does not have to kill dogs. Something interesting there. I suppose what it's missing is banter. The banter between Joel and Ellie was what made the first game so memorable. Ellie and Abby's partners keep changing, as though they're trying to fill the role and none quite succeed. I do like the moments where Ellie plays the guitar as what she has left of Joel, and it does give her and Dina a nice quiet moment. One of the things the game likes to make use of in its puzzles is rope. You have to throw the rope over something to be able to explore to the next area. It's not particularly brain-stumping, though. Things are still similar enough to the original game. I do like the animations whenever Ellie or Abby work on upgrading one of their weapons, and I must admit I was caught off guard when Ellie was attacked at a workstation. That was well played, Naughty Dog. I would say that the set pieces are generally thrilling. Ellie and Jesse being in the car and having to escape, and Abby escaping with Lev while the village burns was an incredible visual. The infected feel like an afterthought, but I did like when I get the trigger in the fight against my opponents, and I like how during the sniper battle against Tommy, he uses that against you. Brilliant touch. Some very incredible highs in terms of gameplay and set pieces, even if the narrative was becoming more contrived. Nothing as bad as Sam's life from Uncharted 4, they're just a bunch of little occurrences. Like Dina circling their hideout so when Ellie conveniently drops the map, Abby knows where they are so they can have their theater showdown. But finally, when we return to that confrontation, the game forces you to play as Abby. You see, the game was trying to make you challenge whose side you were on. For all the faults of Mortal Kombat 11 Aftermath expansion, and believe me, there were many, at least that gave you a choice. Did you want to fight the final battle as Liu Kang or Shang Tsung? I wish this game gave me a similar choice. Did I want to play as Ellie or Abby and let the game end here? Sure, you might have multiple endings, but I'm sure you could work around that. I find the fight to be particularly annoying because if Ellie sees you, it's a one-hit kill, and that happened a lot. And by this point, I felt like I had no control over what was happening. Abby defeats Ellie, but Dina, in a moment of stupidity, just lunges at Abby, yelling and screaming. Abby spares them because she doesn't want to lose Lev like how the rest of her friends were bothered by her torture of Joel. So you think the game ends there, but it doesn't. Instead, we cut to Ellie living on a farm with Dina and her child JJ, named in honor of Joel and Jesse. Tommy appears, and I was just seriously wondering, how are you not dead? Now, obviously, Ellie is still haunted by Joel's death and seeks to maybe get closure by going after Abby again, and at this point, I said these words, "When does this end?" Which is something I never want to say when I'm playing a game. Ellie goes after Abby again, who gets captured by some slave labor, I think. They don't really elaborate on this faction. Yeah, that's another thing I should go into. The Scars factions are just clear-cut bad guys. There's no morally gray about them. At this point, some of the characters' durability starts to lose its believability. Ellie gets stabbed in the exact same place Joel was in the original game, which left him comatose for a few months, but Ellie is fine. Hobbling, but well enough to keep walking. I know she stitched it herself, but still. I did like using the effect against the slave owners, one of my favorite things to do in this game. By the time Ellie finds Abby, Abby is a shell of her former self, and I'm just wondering why Ellie doesn't just shoot her and be done with it. Why does she set her free? Maybe she felt guilty, and I'm not sure why she's giving Abby a fair fight, because she didn't give Joel the same courtesy. This is the other most controversial part of the game, the ending. As Ellie is finally about to kill Abby, she lets her go after memory of Joel. Yeah, this whole thing, I gotta admit, it didn't work for me. You see, I could buy why the player might not want to kill Abby, but Ellie doesn't know those things. Not to mention she's already killed countless amounts of people and just had her fingers bitten off, so what's one more? Not to mention it leads into the ending where Ellie returns home and finds Dana has left her. So our line about ending up alone has come true. Ellie in her quest for vengeance has lost everything. And I think this sort of thing would have worked better if Ellie had killed Abby, because then you would have been left to ask, was it worth it? One of the things about the first game was the ambiguous ending. Did Joel do the right thing in saving Ellie? Well, if this game is anything to go by, no, Joel absolutely did the wrong thing. That being said, their last conversation was actually a positive one. Ellie is willing to look past it and forgive Joel. It's tender and heartbreaking.
I don't think I can ever forgive you for that. But I would like to try.
I'd like that.
Okay. I'll see you around.
Yep.
So in the end, The Last of Us Part 2 is, well, it's interesting. What is this game's impact? Even a year later, I don't think anyone can truly say. I guess we'll know when Part 3 comes out in 6 years. It'll probably end the PS5 generation like how both 1 and 2 ended the PS3 and PS4. I respect the game for taking risks, but a risk is still that, a risk. I didn't care for Abby as a character, but the attempt was admirable. Did I agree with every narrative choice? No. Did I understand them? Yes. So, do I love or hate the game? Well, maybe I love and hate it, or I neither hate nor love it. It's difficult to say, but in the end, it's quite the experience whether you love it or hate it. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, please hit that bell, like, and subscribe button. If you want updates, follow me on Twitter, join my Discord, or follow me on Twitch, or provided in the description below. See you next time.